everybody. John TheMorgile here. Checking in for a New Year's 2024 live stream. Hope y'all are having a great 2024 insofar. Let me make sure that we are live, loud, and clear before I get started. 1 second. All right.
Don't do that again.
What? Huh?
Don't show me on there.
Oh. What's up, Rajamak? I seen YouTube in the house. Mikey Smith. What's up, guys? Sea Lightning, Dee Rosa, Will Barrow. Welcome, one and all. We're gonna go through some NASA news just to check in with the boneheads over at NASA, seeing how we're now into 2024. Justin Johnson, much love. Okay. So yeah, I think we're live and loud. Just give us a thumbs up there if you can see and hear me well. I'd appreciate it. And yeah, let's get right into it. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on is the OSIRIS Rex dealio, because I think that's kind of a big deal that, you know, as U.S. taxpayers, we spent untold billions of dollars sending up these alleged spacecraft to go take samples from an asteroid, and yet NASA's having trouble opening the capsule to get at the sample. And still it's been basically radio silence still for months, it's going on months now, where NASA, they don't seem to be updating us much about the progress on this. But I wanted to juxtapose an article that I found from 2020 when the OSIRIS Rex grabbed the sample of the asteroid Bennu, and juxtapose that with their story today, because, you know, one telltale sign of someone that's telling lies is their story is going to change over time, right? And NASA's no exception to that little sort of rule of thumb, right? So back in 2020, and I'll give you the exact date of this article once it loads up, the story was that NASA's OSIRIS Rex capsule thing had grabbed so much asteroid sample, and it was sealed so poorly, apparently, that it was literally leaking rocks and dust into space. And that's in 2020. Because you know how, you know, rocks and dust tend to leak, right? If you've got like a bucket full of rocks and dust and then poke a hole in the side of it, we know how common that is to get a rock and dust leak, right? But anyway, let me see this over. Let's see. As long as I'm not way off. Yeah, that's pretty good. So again, this is October of 2020. And this is from the New York Times, so pretty official source, right? It says, NASA's effort to grab a piece of an asteroid on Tuesday may have worked a little too well. The spacecraft OSIRIS Rex grabbed so much rock and dirt that some of the material is now leaking back into space, which to me, that's so comical. Like, I literally laughed out loud the first time I read that. Like, you know, you might think of liquids or gases leaking from something, but rocks and dust leaking. And also it harkens back to Don Pettit, you know, claiming that in the LISS, when they get a leak, it's not that big a deal. And you got to remember, the LISS is supposedly under, you know, comparable to Earth atmospheric pressure, maybe a little bit less according to them. But according to the, you know, to the lying astronauts, it's not that big of a deal to spring a leak in a pressurized cabin with, you know, with oxygen and whatnot pressurized in the cabin. that's not a big deal. But if you've got a little science canister filled with rocks and dust, then that's going to leak, right? It's just so silly to me, the concept of leaking rocks out of something. I don't know. It's such a NASA thing to say, right? But we got to remember, it is hard to be NASA. So it says, continuing with the article, the operation some 200 million miles from Earth on the other side of the sun was almost too successful, Dante Loretta, the principal investigator of the mission, said during a telephone news conference. NASA officials worried that without careful effort to secure its samples in the days ahead, the mission could lose much of the scientific payload that it traveled for years across the solar system to gather. So just parking that there for a minute. One thing that I find really hard to wrap my brain around is the concept of this little, generic Limobile, this space capsule, hundreds of millions of miles away, according to them, on the other side of the sun, somehow communicating back and forth with, Houston or wherever they claim their base is. Because remember, you have to have, in order to complete radio transmissions, you basically have to have line of sight. And to have like the sun in between the spacecraft and your base here on the ground, it's really counterintuitive as to like, how are these liars actually claiming to have radio communication with this thing when it's on the other side of the sun, right? But nobody ever questions NASA on these sorts of things. So anyway, I thought that was kind of strange as well. Continuing with the article, a few rocks wedged in the robotic probe's collection mechanism prevented a flap from fully closing. In images taken by the spacecraft, scientists could see bits of asteroid coming out. Dr. Loretta estimated that each image showed about 5 to 10 grams, up to about 1/3 of an ounce, of material floating around the collector. That is a significant loss, as the mission's aim is to bring back at least 60 grams of asteroid dirt and rocks. Okay. So here they're saying that one of these flaps was being prevented from fully closing, so it was leaking sample into space, and they could tell they could weigh these samples in space just by looking at pictures somehow, which I'm not exactly sure how the hell you would do that, but okay, they're experts, so we'll just take their word that they're able to weigh rocks and dust in space by looking at pictures from their Limobile. But okay, so keep that. So put a pin in that NASA's claim back in 2020 that they couldn't even close the flaps on this thing. Okay, because now their story has definitely changed to the complete polar opposite of that. That now they're claiming that they can't even open it, right? But we'll continue with the article. It says, so this is a quote from this guy, Loretta, Dr. Loretta. He says, "You've got to remember the entire system is in microgravity," he said. "The particles move as if in a fluid, and particles are kind of diffusing out," he said. Okay. So apparently that sort of common sense applies, so ending quote on the article there, but that sort of common sense applies for space debris, for the asteroid dust, right? But not for the lying Freemasons in the LISS, right? So if they spring a leak on the LISS, not a big deal. You just sort of have a leak and there's, quote, probably a plan to deal with that. According to astronaut Don Pettit, there's probably a plan. But when it comes to this dust and rock samples from the asteroid, that literally behaves as a fluid, and rock and dust leak into space from not having one of these flaps closed, right? However, the visual evidence suggests that the spacecraft gathered much more than 60 grams. So time is of the essence, they said, right? They declared they were going to start preparations for stowing the sample, okay? Because if the collection attempt had not succeeded, so if they hadn't have gotten so much on the first try, allegedly, OSIRIS Rex could have made 2 more attempts. Mission managers also decided to call off 2 maneuvers. One scheduled for Friday was to slow down the spacecraft and allow it to re-enter orbit around the asteroid Bennu, which is only about 1,600 feet in diameter. Instead, it continues to drift away at a speed of less than a mile an hour. So just putting the brakes on that for a moment. So they're claiming that their little Lie-mobile, their little satellite thing or whatever, is able to orbit asteroid Bennu, even though the damn thing is only 1,600 feet in diameter, right? So by that sort of logic, you know, and I mentioned this before, but doesn't that sort of mean that gravity should be scalable here on Earth as well? So like if asteroid Bennu, which is only 1,600 feet in diameter, is producing enough gravity to allow for orbit around it, right? Then why can't we recreate gravity with some large-ish thing like a mountain or whatever, or something large and dense like that here on Earth? Like it's a double standard, right? Because the whole shtick about gravity is basically you need at least a planetary-sized object to get enough gravity to produce like measurable orbital gravity waves, if that terminology is right. But no, according to NASA, now they can just orbit something as small as asteroid Bennu in space. So, you know, isn't it kind of a double standard? I just think that that's odd that you can't measure or detect gravity on large, dense things here on the ground, but in space now they can orbit the asteroid. I mean, to me, it's just so nonsensical, even according to their own shtick, right? Because I know what the shtick about gravity is. You're supposed to have, like, you know, at least planetary-sized objects to create enough gravity for things like orbit, right? So that was their first plan. The second plan that they nixed was to spin the spacecraft around on Saturday to measure how much is trapped inside the collection mechanism. But that would shake out more material, so that's not a prudent path to go down, Dr. Loretta said. Right. So the collection sample was the key objective of the mission, whose full name, and they got to give you the anagram for origins: Spectral Interpretation, Resource Identification, Security, Regolith Explorer. Asteroids are primitive 4.5 billion year old leftovers from the earliest days of the solar system, the article claims. So, I mean, they know the age, date, composition of these asteroids. Why are we even bothering collecting samples, right? So the article continues on Tuesday. Again, this is from 2020. On Tuesday, the spacecraft's collection mechanism touched the asteroid Bennu at a leisurely pace of about 1.5 inches per second. The sampling mechanism, which resembles an automobile air filter, had been designed to work on a wide variety of surfaces, ranging from completely rigid, like running into a slab of concrete, Dr. Loretta said, to something much more porous. That part of Bennu turned out to be on the softer side, according to the liars at NASA, with the asteroid hardly pushing back at all. The sampling mechanism pushed 10 to 20 inches into the soil before the spacecraft backed away, allowing it to flip up its collector when a burst of nitrogen gas from the probe stirred up the surface. Dr. Loretta says, we could not have performed a better collection experiment. So it went off without a hitch, according to their official sort of story here. The operation to stow the collection mechanism may start on Tuesday. Engineers are looking at how to modify the procedure to minimize the amount of material that may be shaken out into space. It will take several days before the samples are safely stored in a return capsule. OSIRIS Rex must wait until March to leave Bennu and return to Earth, a journey that will take 2.5 years. The spacecraft will drop off the return capsule, which will then parachute to a landing in Utah, September of 2023, which they did, okay? So now we'll just cut off that article for now, because that's the meat of what we wanted to go over in that article. But let's go to the article. This now is from this year. Okay, so 2023. And this one is going to be from as soon as my stupid computer loads, I'll tell you. IndiaTimes.com. So this is not an official NASA website, but Times of India, IndiaTimes.com. I guess it's a pretty mainstream deal in India, right? So, quoting from the article, again, this is from 2023. New Delhi, nearly a month after NASA's OSIRIS Rex, and I'm not going to read what the anagram means again. The spacecraft capped its 7-year mission with the successful deposit of a pristine sample of surface material from the asteroid Bennu in the Utah desert. The space agency is now struggling to open the canister to get at the space rocks. So first, and I guess maybe I'm missing something here, but it is kind of strange that the first story was that the thing didn't even shut properly, and it was literally leaking dust and rocks into the space or whatever that means. But that has now changed to not only did they get so much material that it was like a wild success beyond their wildest dreams of what they would have gotten. Out of 3 attempts, they got it on their first attempt. But now the thing is sealed so well, it's months on into them having access to it, and they can't even open the damn thing, right? So, that just doesn't really sit well with me. And, we know that NASA lies and the whole thing's a fraud, but, I mean, this kind of highlights that fact, doesn't it? So we'll continue with this article because it's just funny to see how, like, NASA gets a free pass. Their stories can change over time, and nobody seems to remember what they do from one day to the next. Nobody seems to care that their claims are shown to be false on a regular basis, but they just change their story, and it's fine. Nobody seems to notice. Nobody seems to care, right? Scientists have collected rock and dust from outside the canister, but the bulk of the sample remains stuck inside. For the past week, the team at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston has been having a hard time opening the TAG-SAM, the touch-and-go sample acquisition mechanism head, a round sampler head at the end of an articulated arm on the spacecraft that was used to grab the sample from the asteroid, right? So first it's, that's just so telling to me. First it's, the thing didn't seal and they're leaking rocks into space. Now it's sealed so well they can't even open it, despite all their best efforts, and they're having to invent new procedures and new technologies at the expense of the taxpayer to figure out how to get at the sample that they've spent, billions of dollars getting, and years of, NASA lies allegedly getting these samples. Scientists are hoping to analyze the sample to explore the origins of our solar system, which again, I would just love to, get 3 piles of rocks from different places and just see, if these scientists could tell you where those piles of rocks are from and how old those piles of rocks are, and, what planet, asteroid, or whatever they came from. I just don't think we're there. I mean, I know we've got things like scanning electron microscopes or whatever, but in terms of, dating rocks, dating dust, I'm pretty sure that sort of technology doesn't exist. But, NASA claims to be able to do that. Quote, after multiple attempts at removal, the team discovered 2 of the 35 fasteners on the TAGSAM head could not be removed with the current tools approved for use in the OSIRIS Rex glove box. So wait, so who approves the use of the tools? Why don't you just open the damn thing? Like that, I don't know, that doesn't sit well with me. Wouldn't you just figure out a way to get it open? Why do you have to approve the tools for the job? I don't know. It just seems such a NASA thing to do, isn't it? NASA wrote in a blog post, the team has been working to develop and implement new approaches to extract the material inside the head while continuing to keep the sample safe and pristine. Well, isn't that nice of them? When the aluminum lid to the sample canister was first removed, the mission team found black dust and debris on the avionics deck of the canister. On October 11th, NASA showed samples collected from the outside of the TAGSAM head, while adding that it still hasn't opened the sample canister yet. So that's all the way back in October of 2023. So now we're in January of 2024, and as far as I can tell, there's still not a peep from NASA about this. I think they did project a date of sometime in 2024 to get this thing open, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's nothing in there after all this. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they do something like that, because otherwise they're going to have to send something to all of these different universities and partners that have been promised, portions of this sample to study and run tests on or whatever. But frankly, if you're watching this channel, you probably already know that there is no such thing as the asteroid belt as they claim. There couldn't be, because space is fake, right? So just by default, these claims of asteroids and rocks flying around in space millions of miles away is just absurd. It's ridiculous, right? And so they can't, in my opinion, and maybe they'll prove me wrong, but in my opinion, they're not going to be able to send bulk samples to all these universities and partners that have been promised samples. So to me, the prudent thing for them to do would just be to say that, once they finally do admit to getting that thing open, that they're just going to say that there was nothing in there after all. All they got was the little bit of dust on the outside. It wouldn't surprise me if that's what ultimately happens, but not predicting anything here, because you never know with NASA. Quote, the only problem is a great problem, and that's we found a lot more sample than we were anticipating before even getting into the TAGSAM. So according to them, they already have more than they had hoped. Wouldn't it be funny if it turns out that their sample that they got is just Utah desert after all, and there's nothing in the canister? I mean, that would be funny. Mark my words on that. It would be funny if that's what happens. the tools for any proposed solution to extract the remaining material from the head must be able to fit inside the glove box and not compromise the scientific integrity of the collection. You mean like leaking into space and having more of the sample on the outside of the capsule than you have on the inside? I mean, it seems to me that that sample isn't all that pristine to begin with, now is it? It couldn't be. Otherwise, how could they have all of these problems that they've claimed for the last, 4 years now? Over the next few weeks, the team, and now it's been months. So again, this is from this article is from October of 2023, but it says over the next few weeks, the team will try to come up with new ways to extract the rest of the sample. And it takes dozens of scientists, billions of dollars to figure that out, I'm sure, right? Because it's hard to be NASA, let me tell you. I mean, when you pay $10,000 for a toilet seat, God only knows how much it's going to cost to get a sample recovery tool drawn up and approved by committees and everything, right? Hard to be NASA. To date, the space agency has allegedly recovered 70.3 grams of rock and dust. The team behind the mission has also gotten a head start in analyzing the samples and found an abundance of carbon and water molecules. Yeah, it's probably Utah desert dust, right? I mean, that's probably what it is at the end of the day, either way. But it would be nice to see NASA at least not lie their asses off about this and just make something up, that when the thing landed with its parachute, it got covered in Utah dust or whatever, and that's what the sample on the exterior is. That would be a smart move. If I was NASA, that's what I would do. But then again, I'm not NASA, so you never know. The OSIRIS Rex mission launched in September 2016 and reached asteroid Bennu in December 2018. After nearly 2 years of observations, the spacecraft landed on Bennu, after orbiting it, no less, somehow, and snagged a sample from its surface in October of 2020. OSIRIS Rex dropped off the asteroid samples in the Utah desert September 24th, 2023. So, just think about these two articles. Like, I'm not trying to put ideas in anyone's head, but just juxtapose how their story has changed over time. And it's just such typical NASA nonsense that, we'll find a running theme in the rest of these articles that we're going to go over here shortly. So let me close these out and just free up some RAM because my computer is bogging. Rajamak says, to be fair, the same thing happened to me at the cinema. I bought a large popcorn, and by the time I got to my seat, there was more on the outside of the box than inside. Yeah, so you were leaking popcorn into the space of the movie theater, right? Peruvian face peelers? What is that, Tasha Teeling? Maybe NASA should get a hold of the Peruvian face peelers and get their advice. Yeah, Peruvian face peelers. That's a new one for me. But it sounds lovely. Okay. So here's another article I found kind of funny. Let's see if I can minimize this a bit and get it to fit on my screen here. Yeah, here we go. So let's face it. If you've been following along to this movement for any amount of time, you'll know that NASA has been caught faking all kinds of things, right? Okay, I will, Tasha Teeling. Especially when it comes to the ISS, like, we've caught them on camera of their own official video feeds with air bubbles in space, and what has been purported, and I think makes a lot of sense, that Okay, so NASA owns this large underwater tank that has a allegedly full-size replica of the ISS underwater so that they can do training exercise and tests and that sort of thing. But what has been purported, and I think makes a lot of sense, is that all of the, allegedly in space shots of the ISS are actually filmed underwater in that tank with the full replica of the ISS, at least for the exterior shots, okay? When they're in their full spacesuits, you can see them practicing underwater all the time. I mean, it's something that they do claim to do, is practice and do tests and exercises underwater. But it isn't that big of a leap to suggest that, well, since we know space is fake, it makes a lot of sense that they would be filming all of their ISS shots underwater to get the, the full weightlessness trick photography without having to spend billions of dollars on movie production, right? It would make that a lot easier. You just have to change a few graphics in the background, right? And there you go, you've got it. But what this article is going to try to say is that, well, we'll just read the article and we'll respond as we go. But I do think that we have enough evidence. So, let me back up. If the hypothesis is that NASA is faking their exterior shots of the ISS in underwater tanks, then you would expect to find some footage of air bubbles in space, because the air that, the little liars astronauts are breathing underwater has to go somewhere. And sure, they can probably edit a lot of that out, which I'm sure they do, but you would expect to find glimpses of these air bubbles in the space shots of the ISS. And lo and behold, if you dig through the archives of NASA over the years with the ISS, you'll find just that, all kinds of instances of air bubbles in space, right? Then for the interior shots of the ISS, they clearly use a different method. Like, they're not underwater when they're doing the interior shots, right? When they're flying around in gorilla suits or whatever on the ISS. But they've got two different production angles that they use, two different processes that they use. And then, of course, they edit that together for a seamless sort of fakery. But so let's read this article from AP News. And this is from 2023, April of 2023. So let's see. Let me slide this. There we go. Much better. So AP News is responding to a claim, okay? And that claim is that footage purporting to show astronauts aboard the International Space Station is staged and was actually filmed on Earth. And then AP's assessment that claim is false. And they get their information from a spokesperson from NASA. A spokesperson from NASA and space science experts say that the footage is legitimate and that there is ample evidence to show that there are real people on the massive research complex floating above Earth. Additionally, examples cited as proof of an elaborate hoax are easily explained. Footage of astronauts in spacesuits working underwater is from training exercises at NASA, for example, and video glitches are due to satellite transmission interruptions. Okay, so pause that here. So what they're saying is their claim that the footage from the ISS is real is because the underwater footage, so like the air bubbles in space, that's merely from training footage that is acknowledged to be underwater from NASA. But see, they're missing the point. Like, that's not what we're saying. We're not talking about training footage when we point out air bubbles in space. We're talking about official NASA spacewalk footage. And not just NASA. This, you can find it from Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, and China and all space agencies have been caught doing the same sort of fakery. Because apparently it is fairly easy to fake things like spacewalks using underwater tanks instead of like full CGI or the more antiquated claymation that they definitely did use back in like the 70s or whatever. NASA's been faking this crap for many decades, and their ability to fake these things has definitely improved over time. And you can definitely sort of see a progression of their technology and capabilities of faking improving over the years. But they've definitely been faking this since the beginning. And it all starts going back to the very first alleged spacewalk, where they're clearly using like stop motion animation, the same sort of thing that they used for old movies like Jason and the Argonauts or The Clash of the Titans or something like that, right? Okay, so the facts. Some social media users are reviving a long-running conspiracy theory that no one is actually manning the wheel at the International Space Station that's been orbiting the Earth for more than 2 decades now. And I would say that even that their claim about the facts is wrong. I would say that the International Space Station doesn't actually exist. It's not actually orbiting the Earth as they claim. Sure, you can see something up there with the telescope that they claim is the ISS, but it's not up. There is no football field sized object up there orbiting with little Freemasons running around on it. And I think one big point to point out is the fact that they claim that the ISS is like 250 miles in altitude. That's their claim. And also the other part of that claim is that the ISS is about the size of a football field, okay? Now, the problem with that is you can definitely see something in the sky that is called the ISS, even with the naked eye or definitely with a telescope. The problem is if you take an object that's the size of about a football field and remove it from the observer some 250 miles away, the angular size of that object would be too small even for a high-powered telescope to see. There's a resolution limit in terms of the angular size of an object that at a certain distance, things just become too small to see. And the fact that we can see an object in the sky that NASA claims is the ISS proves conclusively that it is definitely not a football field sized object some 250 miles away. It couldn't be because, let's face it, first of all, what is lighting it? Because supposedly, infinite space is very dark, right? Especially when you're on the night side of the Earth, there is no direct line of sight to the sun. So first of all, what is lighting the ISS? There is not supposed to be any sort of self-illumination or ambient lighting coming from the ISS in order to make it visible on the ground. Couple that with the fact that it is supposedly only the size of a football field, but also supposedly 250 miles away. The fact that we can see it, yes, even with a telescope, proves that those claims are erroneous. They have false claims. But let's continue with the article. So they say the clip. So they're talking about like it's one clip of the astronauts lying. The clip suggests some footage from the station contains astronauts purportedly pulling at hidden wires or wearing harnesses in order to appear to be in a gravity-less environment. And that's all very true, but what do they mean, the clip, singular, right? There are seemingly endless instances of NASA being called out for this sort of thing because yes, they do have a very high tech capability to fake things, but they still mess up. They still make mistakes, right? And so to say that this is one clip is just totally missing the boat, AP. Like, where do you do your research? NASA.gov.com or whatever? Like, I think that's what they do. It also suggests, this clip suggests that air bubbles can be seen in some of the shots of astronauts floating outside the station, proving that the images were actually shot underwater in a movie studio and not in space. Well, here. Quote, if astronauts are really up there, why are they faking the footage? Wrote one user in an Instagram post that's been liked nearly 11,000 times as of Thursday. I can think of a lot better things to do with $3 billion a year. Here. But NASA officials dismiss the notion, saying that video glitches cited in these posts as evidence of green screen and CGI are actually the result of brief transmission interruptions between the station's communication antennas and the agency's satellite network. And, you know, what an insult to our intelligence collectively, because I think we all know the difference between compression issues and artifacts in video. Like, compression issues and artifacts like that are pretty easy to spot. But when you're talking about NASA fakery, it definitely has sort of a signature to it. And I would cut in some clips here, but I'm pretty low tech with my streaming capabilities right now, so you're just stuck with me. But I am working on some content that I'm going to be putting out as soon as possible, going through some of this stuff and reviewing some of these videos that I think are very compelling. And it's not just one clip, not by a long shot. But NASA officials dismissed this notion of fakery, saying video glitches cited as posts as evidence of green screen and CGI are actually the result of, oh, I just read that. So yeah, pooey on that. It's, you know, as researchers in the field, it's not like we're ghost hunters here, where every, you know, artifact or every compression error is a ghost or something, you know. No, we can tell the difference between compression artifacts and NASA fakery. Like, there's a big difference, right? Quote from NASA, at no time have props, green screens, wires, or simulated underwater facilities substituted for actual real-time operation on the space station. Sandra Jones, a Houston-based spokesperson, wrote in an email Thursday that also included links to the agency's blog about the crew's activities, as well as its Spot the Station tracking tool. Right. So yeah, it definitely appears that APnews.com does their investigative journalism into NASA's shenanigans by asking their PR team, asking their spokespeople these questions. Like, what do you think Sandra's going to say? Do you think Sandra's going to admit that NASA's been faking space since the 1960s, or really longer than that, since Operation Paperclip? I don't think so. Like, she's paid by NASA and probably fully believes in the credibility of NASA to say those sorts of things. So not exactly the best person to ask, AP News, just saying. Jonathan McDowell, an astrophysicist with the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard, says, none of it remotely has merit. The material you can see on NASA.tv and Roscosmos videos of live coverage of crew members aboard the ISS is clearly legit, and to suggest it's fake is just silly and ignorant, end quote. So Jonathan McDowell clearly is a globetard, clearly is a NASA fanboy, probably wears NASA underwear as far as I can tell. But to dismiss what we're saying and not even look into it, that's pretty typical. Like, we're so used to that. But I would say that the videos that many of us content creators have been highlighting and circulating for years can't be just dismissed like that. There's lots of examples where NASA, in my opinion, has been caught red-handed faking space. And it's because of Ivy League regurgit parrots like this guy that NASA is able to continue scamming everyone for as long as they have done, right? It's because of people like that apologizing for NASA and dismissing people who are calling them out without even looking into what we're saying. That's part of the problem. And, you know, because of the fact that NASA has billions of dollars annually at their disposal to do all kinds of PR stunts and probably pay people off, you know, it's no wonder. And you know, also, I would suggest that, you know, any of the federal agencies that want to look into money laundering should look no further than NASA, because clearly, in my opinion, that's what they're doing. It's a money laundering scheme. That's all NASA is, in my opinion. I mean, sure, it has the added benefit of the whole, you know, propaganda, the whole continuing of the status quo, continuing of the space farce that it is. But also, why not the added benefit of flushing billions of dollars down a black hole, almost literally. It's perfect for money laundering reasons. It really is. So this guy, Jonathan McDowell, argued that the portion of the video clip, as if it's one clip, right? It's so funny how they keep referring to this as the clip, singular. He argued that the portion of the video clip that purports to show an astronaut tugging at a suspension wire holding up one of his colleagues more likely depicts the space explorer adjusting a microphone or headset cable behind his colleague during an on-camera interview. And I know exactly which clip he's talking about. I'm sure you guys do too, where you can see like the one astronaut reaches behind the other dude's side and like braces him because he's like flipping or something. It's really weird. But he's definitely grabbing a hold to a wire that has been digitally removed. Maybe it was green, you know what I mean? But for him to claim that it was just one clip is really, that's quite typical, because there are endless clips of NASA, which it's becoming harder and harder to find these things. And I guess there's probably some websites out there that have compiled this. If there's not, there should be. Because it used to be really easy to find NASA fakery clips on places like YouTube, but anymore it's become almost impossible to find anything that casts NASA in a bad light on YouTube, because, well, we all know that flat Earth is an archaic, antiquated, you know, discontinued belief held by ancients, you know, and that sort of thing. But anyway, McDowell added that amateur radio operators frequently speak with astronauts in orbit, and the radio frequency shifts they experience during those communications is evidence the astronauts are high above the planet. I call bullshit. I really do. You know, if you don't think that NASA could fake that sort of thing using their array of high altitude communications balloons that they definitely have up there instead of satellites, then I don't know what to tell you, but they could definitely do that. They go on to talk about Doppler shift, which is, so I'll just read it. This is a quoting, it doesn't say, Joshua Caldwell, a planetary scientist. Quote, "There's a thing called Doppler shift, which changes the frequency of a radio signal from a moving object," he explained in an email. "From that, you can prove that the radio transmitter is moving at very high speeds, such that it must be in orbit." I call pooey on that. Pooey, 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 because, you know, frankly, let's put it this way. Orbit requires a ball Earth housed within infinite space. Orbit requires gravity to be a real thing. The fact that the Earth doesn't have curvature and is not in motion, and the fact that we have a pressurized environment here in reality debunks this notion of the infinite vacuum of space adjacent to our world. So by default, we know for sure that NASA must be lying about things being in orbit. Therefore, there must be some other explanation for this alleged Doppler shift that's, ham radio operators are supposedly noticing when communicating with the astronauts on the ISS. The video is actually from training exercises at the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, where the astronauts prepare for the weightless environment of space, he said. So what they're doing is they're claiming that any videos that you might see of air bubbles in space are just, they're merely training videos acknowledged by NASA to be shot in the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. But that's not the case. The truth is there are lots of videos that show air bubbles in space that are claimed by NASA to be real footage of the ISS in orbit, right? So they're definitely lying. And, for AP News to just not do any research and just take NASA at face value for their claims is pretty typical of how research is done by these big news agencies. The 2013 incident, which there's a hyperlink here, the 2013 incident, along with a similar, less severe one last year, was actually the result of a faulty cooling system in the astronaut's spacesuit, which contains water. Oh, they're talking about when the astronaut nearly drowned in space, right? Okay, well, we know about that one, yeah. Snorkels while they do it, right? Okay. So enough with that article. I think we've, wait a minute, there's a little bit more here. So the quote continues, "There is no air in the vacuum of space to conduct heat away from the astronaut." Oh, so this is moving away to something else entirely. Yeah, they say, what's more, the underwater air bubbles purportedly captured in some videos of astronauts doing work outside the space station are more likely dust or ice particles, he said. No, they're air bubbles, dude. We can tell the difference between air bubbles and dust particles, I think. Bubbles of gas moving through a fluid do not follow a perfectly straight line as they rise to the surface, Caldwell explained in an email. The things I saw on the video shown do not move in parallel lines, but move outward like a fan from a common point of origin. And they move at a constant speed in a perfectly straight line. So again, he's discussing this as if it is a singular video, right? Or a single clip. No, there's lots of examples of this. Like, all you need to do is look. And I guess maybe now it is a little more difficult because of the whole algorithm change thing. But, there's lots of videos out there proving NASA is definitely faking space, just using exactly the tactics that are being sort of brought up and strawmanned in this article. On Friday, 2 of the astronauts are planning a more than 6-hour-long spacewalk to work on power cables and communications antenna in preparation for the installation of a new solar array, according to NASA, which maintains a website, blog, and social media accounts providing frequent updates about the crew's activities. So a couple things there I think is interesting. First of all, isn't it funny how NASA, in all their wisdom, has so engineered the ISS to where critical components and other things that are going to need periodic maintenance and fixing on the ISS, they purposely put that stuff on the outside of the ISS instead of on the inside where they could just fix it without doing the whole melodramatic spacewalk. They put that stuff on the outside so that they can have a reason to produce these movies that are the spacewalks that are definitely faked in these underwater tanks. At least that's one way that they do it. Maybe they've got other ways they do that as well, but certainly, at least historically, they have been doing that in underwater tanks. And there's more than just one clip about it. There's lots. So just a typical whitewashing, typical straw manning of the AP News here, which, we've come to expect this sort of thing, just covering for NASA, not actually digging, just, assuming that what we were all taught in elementary school about the spinning ball Earth is true, and then, taking that assumption all the way to our graves with us, apparently. In the last stream, we talked about the Voyager 1 still sending back data after like 50 years of being out in space. And I had asked the question, what is powering these things? How are they able to power Voyager 1, allegedly, since the 1970s, which, by the way, so on the thumbnail of this video that you're watching now, there's a picture of Saturn right there on the thumbnail. That's one of the images that was allegedly sent back from Voyager 1 from when it was launched in the 70s or whatever. And, it's just a perfect example of how the technology of the 1970s NASA fakery, it looks exactly like something that was faked in the 1970s, right? Like it has a certain feel to it because, well, of course, the technology wasn't the same as we have today. They didn't have CGI technology. And so anything they faked had to be done sort of analog, if you will. And the images sent back from Voyager 1 from the 1970s looks exactly like 1970s faked footage or faked images, right? So, so that is interesting. But what I found the most interesting was the fact that, again, this thing has been powered without changing batteries, without any sort of maintenance, without anybody even, changing oil or whatever. There's been nothing done to this thing since it's allegedly been in space for like 50 years. What is powering this thing? And so what they claim is powering it is called a radioisotope thermo-electric generator, right? The nuclear power supply loses 4 watts per year as the plutonium it relies on slowly decays and its heat is converted into electricity. Over time, the Voyager team has commanded the probes to turn off instrument heaters and other non-essential systems to save on power. But like you would think that if we really had the ability to basically produce little nuclear reactors since the 1970s, that we should see more everyday common uses of such technology, especially seeing how, it works flawlessly for decades and decades without the need for any maintenance. I mean, could you imagine a battery or a power pack that worked for 50 years without having to do any sort of recharge or something like that? I mean, to me, that is really quite unbelievable. But if you dig in a little bit more to radioisotope thermoelectric generators, they are only used, with very few exceptions, for satellites, for NASA technologies or space technologies, right? So if you look up the patent for radioisotope thermoelectric generator, the patent applications I thought was strange, and maybe somebody who's better at patent research than I can tell me something about this, but the applications for the patent for that technology are found in the year of 2016. So for a technology that was supposedly invented in the 1950s and has worked flawlessly for the likes of NASA for many decades, going off without a hitch for decade after decade, I just find it really strange that the patent for that, and again, I'm quoting from Google Patents, if you look up radioisotope thermoelectric generator, the patent number is WO 2016 138389 alpha 1. So again, that's WO 2016 138389 alpha 1. The patent for this radioisotope thermo-electric generator was only applied for in 2016. So I found that kind of strange, right? Because you would expect, again, something that was such a flawless and reliable form of power generating on a relatively small scale. It's small enough to go on a satellite launched into space, allegedly. Why aren't there more practical uses for this technology, right? And I would submit, well, I'm not going to submit anything, but I'll let you be the judge. If you Google that and just ask Google, why aren't radioisotope thermoelectric generators used more often? What the excuse or the apologetics is, thermoelectric generators are not very popular for several reasons. One reason is their relatively low efficiency compared to other power generation technologies. They are also currently more expensive to produce than traditional power generation methods, such as burning fossil fuels. Now, wait a minute. So, like, could you imagine having a generator that you could just hook up at your house one day and then never have to put fuel in it, never have to, maintain it, never have to pop it open and fix anything? I mean, could you imagine a generator that didn't need fuel, that works for decades without any maintenance? How could that possibly be inefficient, unpopular, or like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, because you would think, at least I would think, that if something was so stellar as these generators are claimed to be by the likes of NASA, there should be lots of uses for that. I mean, could you imagine having something like that just to heat your hot water or something? Like, even that would save people a ton of money, right? But it's strange to me. So I'll let y'all make of that what you will. But when it comes to space, man, I'm sorry to say, you guys, sorry to say, kids, space is fake. I'm sure there are lights in the sky. The celestial luminaries are definitely a wonder of wonders. But in terms of terra firma destinations, that's never going to happen. They've been promising people trips to Mars and vacations to the moon since like the 1950s and 60s. Any day now, they're going to come out with the vacation to Mars. So I guess the final thing we'll touch on is Elon Musk is in more hot water. And I won't even look at the article. I'll just recall what I read a couple hours ago. So basically, Elon Musk is being sued for illegally firing some people who had circulated a document at SpaceX about Elon Musk, basically stating internally to the company that he was an embarrassment and basically an inept buffoon, more or less. And so the gist of it is SpaceX fired these people and now they're suing them. Now, honestly, I can't think of a situation in any job that I've had in the past where if you got caught circulating a document saying how the boss or like the owner of the company was an asshole and an idiot, I can't think of a situation where you wouldn't get fired. But, I guess there's unions involved. I don't know the whole long and short of it. But now there's people suing SpaceX because they got fired for circulating such a document, basically just talking trash about Elon Musk and how he is a liability to SpaceX, which I think that's beyond argument. I agree with the sentiment, but to be able to sue the company for firing you after doing that, I don't know. Like, that's beyond me, but that's what's going on with Elon Musk. Like, for a billionaire that has it all, I sure wouldn't want to be in his shoes during some of these times. I mean, I really have no love or empathy for the likes of Elon, but again, I wouldn't want to be him, right? So there we go. that basically covers everything I wanted to cover in just an hour. So I do appreciate you guys hanging out with me. As you can see, I'm still in the hotel for the time being, have not been able to get the trailer ready to move in. So we're still struggling, trying to hang on here. Links are below if you want to support the channel. We do love and appreciate all our channel supporters. Again, thanks for hanging with me. Future content coming out real soon, and we'll see you in the next one. All right, guys, take it easy. Yeah, he's not the beast, but he is the one that's going to introduce the mark of the beast. At least that's what one of his nannies claimed, I think. So like this woman who was Elon Musk's nanny allegedly claimed that he wasn't the Antichrist, but he would be the one to usher in the mark of the beast. I don't know. That's really strange, especially considering the fact that he is coming out with the whole microchip in the brain type technology, right? All right, you guys, adios, muchachos. Love y'all much, and we'll see you very soon in the next. All right, Happy New Year's. Bye.